Man, you've probably watched me like age on this channel, huh? It's been 10 years. um, we've been mostly focused on micro content, on TikTok and things like that. Um, but our best follower account is still here on YouTube. So I kind of welcome the opportunity to talk about something a little bit more long form. So we got a question, and I hope this person doesn't mind, but it's kind of a big question, and so it's hard to answer in just a single short video. So let me go ahead and read what we have here. I have a lightsaber sparring class near my hometown, and one of the common lessons we learned is to keep your feet and blade in constant motion to throw your opponent off on where they can attack. If your blade remains stationary, they can clearly tell where you can attack and where you will be exposed. However, I can't seem to make it work for me. Every time I follow through this, I can't plan my attack and defense well. I don't know how to mentally concentrate on both keeping in motion while strategically plan my next move based on where I'm currently in motion. Is this technique not applicable for everyone? I feel more comfortable, usually in a low guard, and remain that way, and I feel like I have a decent block time and maneuver against my opponent no matter how much I'm leaving the rest of my top area exposed. Even my attack is decent, as any direction I move from my low guard position can be redirected. I just don't want to be at a disadvantage or left behind, because mastering the constant motion has more benefits than my current strategy. Any advice? So I think that really, really depends on the system that you're working within. It can make sense. For example, if you're doing ludo sport, where the lower legs don't count as a hit, and the forearm and beyond don't count as a hit, that can make a lot of sense, probably, right? Because you have a lot of blocking space, right? You can effectively use these areas as a blocker, Um, but in something like Lightspeed, it's probably not as useful because everything's a target. So if you are moving around thoughtlessly, then you're just going to expose yourself more, potentially. So I'll try to show an example of what I mean in a little bit. But movement is important, okay? And in Lightspeed, it's extremely important. It just shouldn't be thoughtless movement. So what do I mean by that? So if you don't have a good command of footwork, then I don't think you're going to be able to make very good use of constant movement, okay? So if you haven't studied, for example, how to shuffle the way that a traditional fencer might, then you're not going to be able to do constant movement very well, okay? And I take this as, I liken this to the difference between a ruler, like a foot-long ruler, and a meteor stick, okay? So if you only move in the natural gait, in freestyle movement, left, right, for example, meaning you haven't learned proper fencing footwork, then you're always going to be fencing with a meteor stick, okay? Because you're always moving in multiple feet at a time. Whereas if you learn how to shuffle properly and use proper footwork, as most fencers do, then you're able to fine-tune your spacing, right? That means you can you can move by inches or less, right? And for a sport like most lightsaber fencing today, which are touch sports and are not based on strength of the hit, those inches matter a lot, okay? Because any small error can get you touched, right? And yet the smallest amount can avoid the touch and create opportunities for yourself. So the other mistake I think is often made is an overemphasis on sideways movement, okay? I don't personally believe that sideways movement does a whole lot. Sideways movement should be done thoughtfully. It should be done strategically and or tactically, actually. So meaning that you should expect a certain action from your opponent and use the appropriate sideways action that matches, and not a constant or thoughtless sideways movement. Because you can't really move that fast sideways. It just doesn't work that well. You can, however, move forward and back very quickly, though, okay? That can work out very, very nicely, okay? And the important thing about forward and backward movement is that you gain the advantage of distance, okay? So this becomes the difference between between distance evasion and displacement evasion, okay? So if you're going to move left and right, this is a type of displacement evasion. You will remain within the same range of your opponent, and the only way that your sideways movement works is if your opponent is using a vertical attack, which you can sidestep, right? But lightsabers are pretty light for the most part. They move pretty fast, so it's hard to sidestep a lightsaber. Um, it can gain great benefits for you because you remain within range. And so if you make the correct sidestep against the correct attack, then you can counterattack quickly, okay? On the other hand, if you make a mistake, then you're just going to get hit, okay? A distance evasion, on the other hand, you don't need to know what attack your opponent is throwing at you. They can be attacking from the left, from the right, from the top, from the bottom. It doesn't matter. If you're not there to be hit, then you cannot be hit. So by constantly varying your distance, then that is a much more effective way to use a constant form of motion, okay? So I'll try to show that in a little while too as to what I mean exactly. But basically, constant movement is not that helpful. What you want is constant variation in range, okay? Meaning you want your opponent to be confused and unsure as to where you are in space and to whether you're in range or not, okay? That is something you can do constantly, okay? You can constantly shuffle back and forth and randomly and forward and back, okay? It makes it hard for your opponent to know whether you're in range or not, okay? And that can bait them into making a mistake. So, and as for constant blade of movement, that also can be clumsy, okay? You can also put yourself in danger too, okay? So again, with most lightsaber sports these days, you don't have to strike with any significant amount of force, okay? And so that means that you are incentivized, realistically speaking, but also, you're incentivized to keep your blade in front of you, okay? Because you want to be able to touch your opponent before they can touch you, and this is especially true in lightspeed. Now, if you are thoughtlessly moving your blade around, meaning maybe you're twirling or something like that, right? At some points, you may have your tip drawn behind your hand, okay, or your tip drawn to the side of your hand, right? In which case, your tip is now no longer protecting you, and now you are vulnerable, okay? And whereas if you were to keep the tip in front of you and then move your blade around a lot, okay, that could be more effective because at the very least your blade's in front of you, which is going to create a wall, kind of a wall of offense, okay? You don't have to be actively attacking, just as long as your blade is constantly moving in front of you. It's okay. That way it protects you and also applies a threat to your opponent, okay? So that's going to be a more effective way to apply constant motion in your blade if you are trying to do it in a way that doesn't require too much thought, okay? So one thing that the commentator asked is being able to rally a particular plan of offense or defense while also maintaining a constant motion, right? So in that case, if that's true, then you got to make your constant motion as easy and brain dead to do as possible, okay? Something that you can make your body do relatively simply without having to think too much. And so I think the best way to do that is to, lock down your movements, keep it all within a certain range, okay? That's going to be most effective. And that way you're not making yourself vulnerable while you're still able to constantly do the movements that you're looking for. Okay, so let's see if we can show some examples of this. So let's look at a couple different ways that you can be moving. So if you don't have any footwork training, then you may just be walking around like this, right? Not great, okay? Like I said, it's kind of like walking around with a meter stick as opposed to a ruler, okay? So for example, if D is going to get on guard, okay, right, and she's going to attack me as soon as I'm in range, okay? So that means that I step in and she just, how about down here? Right? She attacks me when I'm in range, okay, right? And I'm trying to move around, she just attacks me whenever I'm in range, right? It's hard for you to, once you start, it's hard to get out of the way, okay? It really limits your options, okay? Whereas if I use more of a shuffle style, right, as I come into range, I can more quickly get out of here, right? And I can also, okay? So, and I can more carefully adjust where I am. If I'm using shuffle footwork, then I can bait my opponent into making an error, right? And then I can capitalize on the mistake, right? Whereas if I'm moving with large steps, it's a lot harder to do the same thing, okay? So if you're going to use constant motion, then you want to use constant shuffles, okay? And therefore vary your place in space, right? So D will go ahead and attack me when I'm in range, okay? D, stay there. Okay, the whole point being that it's hard for her to know when exactly I'm in range or when I'm not. I can bait her into making an error, okay? And if you want, you can also be constantly moving your feet as well while not going anywhere, okay? So if we go on guard, okay, so I can be doing something like this, right? This is masking footwork. That makes it hard for my opponent to know when I'm actually doing something. The thing we talked about was sideways movement, which is often used when a beginner is told to be in constant motion. Not very effective, okay? Because to be moving constantly, your opponent has to be only using verticals. All right, D, go ahead and sidestep, okay? Okay. Okay. All right. So this it basically only works when your opponent is doing that. Okay. Whereas if you try to sidestep, well, I'm just gonna attack you sideways. Not terribly useful. Okay. But if you rely on distance instead, then D doesn't need to know what kind of attack I'm throwing. Right. Right. I can be attacking from any direction, and by using a distance evasion, she'll be fine. Okay. All right. Other thing we talked about was constant blade motion. Okay. If you're just going like this a whole lot, okay, then D can just kind of pick off my hands slowly. Okay. All right. So this is not terribly helpful. Okay. Remember, this is not a handguard. There's no handguard on your saber. It's not a sword. Okay. It's not like an Olympic saber with a large guard or something like that, right? So, constantly moving your blade around is not going to do any good for you. In fact, it might even expose your head while you're moving around constantly, okay? So not very useful. What you want instead, maybe, okay, depending on the rules that you're working within, is keep the tip in front of you, and then now you can leave it in constant motion. And now at the very least, if they attack, you can at least, if D just attacks slowly, you can at least just even just absent-mindedly, you can knock attacks off to the side, things like that, okay? And you might even just, if they attack at the wrong time, you might even just pick off their hand by accident even, okay? So keep the tip in front of you and keep this thing moving, okay? Rather than using large motions, which may expose your hilt or your body, something like that. Okay, I think that's basically it. Anything to add? Yeah? Okay, all right. Hopefully that's helpful. Check your rules, figure out what you might need, and hopefully that will lead you to better luck, okay? Thanks for the question. All right, thank you. Yeah.